Hi, good afternoon. I'm Brent Masel. I want to thank you for attending the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force Awareness Day briefing. Director for the Brain Injury Association of America, Executive Vice President for Medical Affairs with the Center for Neuroskills, and Clinical Professor of Neurology at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. And I also play guitar and banjo in an old fart rock band, just so we have my priorities straight, and I'll be your moderator today. This year marks the 20th year that the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force has sponsored an awareness day. And it usually consists of a fair, a briefing, and a reception in Washington, D.C. However, due to the pandemic, this briefing is held virtually for the first time and hopefully the last time this year. As the past year has certainly presented many challenges for individuals with brain injury, their families, and their caregivers, this briefing is focused on how the pandemic has impacted them. In addition, we are not only we are learning, we are well aware now that individuals infected with COVID-19 may incur neurologic problems due to the virus, such as brain injury and such as brain fog and fatigue. And today, we know that the briefing will provide an opportunity to raise awareness of all these issues. We are pleased that the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force co-chairs, Congressman Bill Pascrell and Don Bacon, are with us today. We are grateful to the task force for an increasing awareness of brain injury and supporting prevention, research, and other initiatives to improve access to rehabilitation and community support. The co-chairs are now circulating a Dear Colleague letter to insist support from members for funding for programs authorized by the TBI Act, research funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, NIDLR for those who are into tongue-tying acronyms, and rehabilitation and research provided by both the Department of Defense and the Veteran Affairs. I would first like to call on Congressman Bill Pascrell, who is the co-chair and founder of the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force. He was first elected congressman for New Jersey's 8th Congressional District in 1996, and now is in his 12th term representing New Jersey's 9th Congressional District. I'm a big fan of Congressman Pascrell. I met him, in fact, he and I both got started in brain injury about the same time, and he has been our strongest, clearly our strongest advocate for all these years. As co-chair of the task force, he has raised the nation's awareness of the dangers of traumatic brain injury. He has sponsored the TBI Authorization Act of 2018, as well as prior reauthorization bills. This year, he is reintroducing the TBI and Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Law Enforcement Training Act. Congressman Pascrell, thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Well, let me tell you something, Brent, Dr. Masel. This has been a trip. You know, the 20 years is one thing. I've been in the Congress for 24 years. But to see this grow from infancy, when you could fit a few congressmen in a phone booth, that would have represented us. Because most of the Congress didn't know what the hell we were talking about, and we just about did. We started out always in a bipartisan manner. Dr. Greenwood was from Pennsylvania, and he's remained a good friend, and we're here. So I want to thank everybody for joining us on this impact, and to talk about, to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on persons with brain injury. This is a pivotal, I believe, a pivotal opportunity to learn more about the impact of TBI, which we've been learning. And let me tell you something. I don't know where you were 20 years ago. I don't know whether you were involved in discussing the TBI and post-traumatic stress disorder. But we've all learned so much, and so much has happened in the past 20 years. And I hope that our caucus has been able to lead rather than get in the way. There hasn't been one issue that we haven't discussed. whether it be in other forums or whether it be in this special day every March. I'm sorry we can't be with each other. I used to like to bend an elbow or two in the afternoon with a nice reception and we could talk with each other like human beings. But we've come a long way. You might have seen the back and forth between me and the administration last year when they minimized concussions when some of our troops were maimed, injured by folks who were not kind to the United States. And then to hear our president say, they just get headaches once in a while. Thank God most people don't think that way and understand what we're all about. So, in order to know what you're all about, you got to study the issue. I knew zero about our subjects in the general vocabulary 20 years ago. I was asked by Dr. Greenwood to be the Democratic representative. And I think I spent a lot of time doing my homework. And I want to thank you all, the professionals, for working so hard to make this a reality for a lot of people. So it takes medical knowledge, it takes political knowledge. I want to thank our task force co-chair, Congressman Bacon from Nebraska, for his work in spreading awareness of traumatic brain injury. I would also like to thank everyone who made Brain Injury Awareness Day work this year. I thought we didn't have to skip it. The National Association of State Head Injury Administrators and the Brain Injury Association of America, two great organizations. The Brain Injury Awareness Day is very different this year, obviously, because of the pandemic, and we're still in that pandemic. It's had a devastating effect on the brains of many people. COVID-19 has been documented to cause a loss of consciousness and confusion, stroke, seizures, headaches, public focusing. And we all know, well, many of these factors can cause an acquired brain injury. The brain injury community, and I do call it a community because we wouldn't have put this budget together for 20 years and improve it just about every other year and do what we did both on the military side and the civilian side and get the military to serve and help the civilian side. And we've learned much from the military. The military's learned much from the civilian. This has happened only because people dedicated themselves to this subject. There has been such a tremendous increase in the number of people who now understand a little bit about brain injury and how it occurs. And what we've been able to do is also put to bed many of the myths about brain injury and concussion, et cetera. So the brain injury community needs more resources to help both existing and new brain injured Americans and make sure they receive the care and rehab they need. So while the pandemic has caused unfortunate disruptions and a lot of pain to regular in-person care for the brain injury community, we have also seen many programs adapt creatively to serve their patients and continue to provide the regular services that individuals living with brain injury require. And this is going to happen with every kind of disease and the epidemic, doesn't matter. We learn so much. We're going to learn a lot from COVID. We're going to learn about our neighbors, ourselves, about what's necessary to try to avoid these pandemics and epidemics And that means new visions of health. And it means more of us getting involved. There's a lot we don't know. There's a lot I don't know. The fiscal year 2021 budget, I believe it's been this way for many years. It presents an opportunity to prioritize investments and understanding the impact COVID-19 has on the brain. And of course, the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force will keep working to increase that awareness of brain injury and support research initiatives for rehab and potential cures. TBI has no boundaries. It affects people of all backgrounds, of every corner of the country, everywhere on the globe. Despite its severity, too little is known about the prevalence of TBI and the terrible impact it can have on a person's life. We're ready for the next chapter. We need you. We need you to let our representatives know, wherever they live, how TBI impacts their districts and how important these resources are. The more awareness we generate, the more we affect and we become. Thank you again for your tireless work and for being here today. It means so much to me personally, and I know it means a lot of the people we try to serve every day. This is an important, pivotal time. There are going to be more debates over the budgets, so everybody's trying to be a priority. And as two of the doctors said last year, I don't know how we all accomplished doing this with the budget through tough times and not so tough times. But this is what we are about. We never accept no for an answer. We have something to prove. And what we need to prove is that we're not going to ignore the people that do have brain injury. And we're not going to be naive about the causes. And that's why so many people now have looked at their own families, kids in their family who have performed all these sports, and what precautions we have to take to protect people. We don't have to die. We don't have to stop playing football, wrestling, baseball, whatever. And when you start to look at the numbers, for instance, we didn't know this 20 years ago, but the difference between the females and male about how whatever they do may be conducive to these kinds of injuries, and then to try to make sure that the industries who service these folks make the right protective gear that is necessary to play the sport. And likewise, many more fold the military, what to wear to keep you one piece, but what to wear to keep your head intact and your brain intact. That's not easy stuff. That's not easy stuff. So those COVID-19 folks living with brain injury have somewhere to turn. Turn to us. We have tried to be the centerpiece with all the great organizations we work with. And I'm sorry we can't, maybe most of you have come to our yearly event, and you've seen the tremendous crowds there. We've grown out of the place. They gave us the biggest place in the Rayburn building, and I don't know where we're going to go next, but we're thinking about it, and we're very important. A lot of vendors come. The military is here. The associations are here. The people who deal with this on a day-to-day basis. There have been some recent actions and some accomplishments for the caucus. We have circulating 2 appropriation letters which request funding for the TBI program at the Department of Defense and at the Department of Health and Human Services. we will introduce very shortly the TBI and the Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Law Enforcement Training Act. I think that's close, which will create best practices in crisis intervention, training tools to law enforcement and their first responders. Me and Representative Bacon urged appropriators to increase funding for the Defense Centers of Excellent Psychology. In the National Defense Authorization Act of 2020, we had language requiring blast explosive injuries to be recorded in service member medical records, which they've never been. That's amazing. In 2018, we introduced the Traumatic Brain Injury Program Reauthorization Act, which passed Congress and authorized existing TBI programs and cleared the National Concussion Surveillance System. So a lot has happened. And I hope you're going to have a great panel discussion. Does anyone have any questions to ask of me or any comments to make before I go to my next assignment? Don't be afraid to ask questions or say something. I think we got a good background for your discussion today. I wish you all well. Anybody have a question?
No, but again, on behalf of everybody involved in the brain injury world, we want to thank you so much for what you've done.
Doctor, thank you. Thank you for being where you are today. And just to go down the line, what state are you in right now? Dr. Hall?
I'm in Texas.
You're where?
Texas.
Texas. And where are you, Dr. Masel?
I'm in Dallas.
I'm in Iowa City, and I work at the VA and came into the VA because of my interest in post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, and just wanted to express my appreciation for the support that Congress and Senate and the administration have provided over the 15 years I've been in the VA. It's been quite remarkable.
You know, it's pretty difficult to get bipartisan support on anything down here. But this is special. And where are you, Jennifer?
I'm from Missouri.
Is that where you are now?
I am, yes. I work for the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services.
Terrific. So you're at the heart of this.
Yes, sir.
Eric?
I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I'm in Kansas City, Missouri right now.
Where are you?
I'm in Kansas City, Missouri.
Oh. Well, wherever you are, thank you for being with us. And Dr. Breiding?
Breiding, yes. Hi, I'm in Georgia, and I'm at the CDC.
And thank you for being here today. Representative, we got to hear from you.
Yeah,
My partner in crime.
I'll be introducing him.
Don, you want to say a few words?
Sure, if it's all right with Dr. Masel there.
Okay, can I introduce you first to the group?
Okay. Hey, by the way, thanks, Bill. You did a great job. You covered this well. My comments will be shorter because you covered it all. But go ahead, Brent.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much, Congressman Pascrell. Representative Don Bacon co-chairs the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force and represents Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. He is serving his 2nd term. He grew up in Momence, Illinois, south of Chicago, where I am from. He has a prior military career, having served 30 years in the U.S. Air Force, ultimately retiring as a brigadier general. He presently serves on the House Armed Services Committee as well as the House Agricultural Committee, and has demonstrated strong support for assistance for those who have served in the military and who have sustained a brain injury. Representative?
Well, thank you, Doctor. And I want to take a moment just to thank Congressman Pascrell. We may not agree on some things. We've worked on some other areas that I'm trying to get him over on a few other bills I'm working on. But when it comes to TBI, we are definitely in sync, and he's an intellectual leader on this with our team, a congressional team, and he is really does some great work, and I've enjoyed joining him on letters that request more funding through the appropriations or bills, whatever we're working on. So I think we've been a good 1-2 punch, and I acknowledge his great leadership here. You know, I got interested in this because I did serve 30 years in the Air Force. I deployed 4 times. And, you know, you get to know a lot of people that were suffering, whether it was PTS, but also TBI. And after serving a year in Iraq, where you could feel the car bomb concussions from a half-mile away, right? And you say, you know, if being closer, that would even be more intense. You know, and then I knew so many people that survived IEDs to their cars where they were tipped over on the side or whatever it may be. And that was going on every day. I mean, when I went to Iraq in 2007, we were suffering 100+ casualties a month, and 10 times that there were injuries, right? And most of those were from these IEDs. And so you take 100 people probably getting killed from these IEDs, primarily IEDs, you times up by 10, there were a lot of people that were walking around with TBI. And the military had to sort of lead the way initially. How do you treat this? But now I think we're at the point where the private sector and the university sector is leading the way. And it's a good tandem right now between the military and the civilian community working together on this. And it doesn't just working on this issue does not just affect the military. We know that we have sports teams and people in car accidents. We could just go on. And so my heart is there because I saw the effects, and I saw the effects every day when I was serving in Baghdad itself on my 4th deployment there. So what I think the panel does here, you give myself and Bill Pascrell good ideas for legislation and funding. You guys arm us with some good thoughts about what we can do next to carry us to the next variation of what we need to be working on with TBI. So we appreciate your research and your brains on this and your suggestions, because that makes us better in Congress. And so we thank you for that. And I sort of see our role is to ensure that we provide the resources for research primarily, but also bring awareness to this. And so I've enjoyed being able to bring awareness, particularly in Omaha area where I represent, but all over the country. But frankly, our main goal is to bring funding so that we can provide better identification of TBI, better detection of it, and then better care for it. So it's the full spectrum of care there. And so part of the work that we've done as a team, you know, in a previous TBI day, or, you know, like it may have been 6 months ago, I can't remember how long ago it was, we talked about how the $300 million roughly research we put into it, how one of the dividends from that was a mobile TBI detection device that's the size of a cell phone that we can bring now in the theater, and you can detect quickly if someone is suffering traumatic brain injury. And boy, wouldn't that have come in handy in January of 2021 or 2020, excuse me, my apologies, when Iran fired all those missiles into Al Assad airfield. And I know Bill Pascrell was talking about that, but there was a dozen some odd missiles, very accurate. Hundreds of people suffered, you know, potential wounds. We weren't sure. But now with this new device, instead of sending everybody home to see if they have TBI, within a couple hours, you can do some detection work through blood markers. And maybe instead of sending 300 people home, maybe send 50 people home who you know that definitely needs the care. And that makes a big impact on the military when you can actually isolate who needs to actually go back to a better facility for care versus who can stay there in the job and get the mission done. Before having this ability, you send everybody back home. They could potentially have a wound from this. And so I thought that was just a great example of a success. And it's starting right here with this great group of folks that cover TBI. So I'm proud of the work. I'm just proud to have a small part in that. And I know it's going to have a huge impact for the military in the many decades to come. I've also been hearing that the FDA is looking at some other technologies right now by using frequency or sound waves or frequencies for those who have TBI that helps provide some curing. They're finding some results right now with this. So it hasn't been released by the FDA yet, but there's some promising technology there that will help folks who have TBI to more quickly heal and overcome it. Finally, I'd just like to say we have the ability to impact here, not only DoD research, HHS, NIH, and those are the kind of things that we have the ability to affect here with appropriations. And that's where I think Bill and I really fit into as part of this team, is to ensure that we're giving you all the resources at the federal level. I know there's going to be more resources, that, whether it's university research or private donors, but the federal role surely has we have a part of this. We got to make sure that we're good partners. So with that said, I just appreciate the leadership of Congressman Pascrell. I appreciate your all's leadership and giving us the tools so that we can better serve in this community and make an impact. I thank you.
Thank you so very much. Again, we cannot tell you enough how important this is and how much we appreciate your support and all that you do. Again,
if I may, one other thing real quick. I just ran into Mike Singletary the other night. For those who are familiar with him, he was one of the best linebackers in the history of the football league. I'm a Chicago Bear fan, best linebacker ever at Chicago Bears. He wants to become part of this team in the future because he has so many friends in professional football that's suffering, and he has a real heart for this. So with your all's permission, I'd like to bring him in a future, our next panel, because he was so excited to know as a part of this and wants to become part of your team. And he's saying there's so many football players right now that need this help and this support. So with that, now I am done. Thank you.
I think that's great, and I obviously can't see her, but I'm sure Susan Connors, our executive director, is doing handsprings across the floor. The thought of having Mike Singletary. I'm thrilled. I'm a Bears fan too, so I'm just, it's great. And thank you both for all you do. I'd now like to introduce the panelists. First of all, we have Mike Hall, who is a staff neuropsychologist at the Iowa City VA. And an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Iowa, and currently serves as the chair of the Governor's Advisory Council on Brain Injuries for the state of Iowa. We also have Jennifer Braun, the brain injury manager for the Bureau of Special Health Care Needs within the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. We have Eric Washington. Eric is a former football player whose football career ended due to a concussion and a spinal cord injury. He got his bachelor's degree in applied behavioral sciences and devotes his life to helping people that suffer from a TBI or helping the homeless population find resources in the community. That's pretty good. And finally, Matt Breiding. He's the TBI team leader at the CDC National Injury Center for Injury Prevention and Control in Atlanta, Georgia. And you can get their full bios in the handout section in your attendee control panel. So our panel today is going to speak about 10 to 15 minutes each, which should leave some time for questions and answers at the end. If you have any questions, please put them in the question box of your attendee control panel. We will monitor them and answer as many as time allows. And we'll follow up following today's webinar if there are still more questions. We'll be happy to answer whatever questions we can. So first we have Michael Hall, who will talk about his work with people who have COVID and are experiencing subsequent neurologic issues. Michael?
All right, great. Can we show the first slide? All right, so COVID-19 is actually known by several different names. Novel coronavirus 19, severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS-CoV-2, and then COVID-19, which is what we've all basically come to use as nomenclature. COVID-19 is actually similar to other coronaviruses that we've seen in the past, such as severe acute respiratory syndrome or SARS in 2003, although there were only about 8,000 patients, so it didn't have the virulence and we didn't get as much information as we certainly are with COVID. And then also the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, which has affected approximately 2,500 patients. Now, if we compare that to the numbers that we currently have, and these are likely underestimates because there's many people who are asymptomatic who have COVID. But as of 2000, these numbers are a little bit old, but we had 114 million cases confirmed worldwide and 2.5 million deaths, 28 million confirmed cases in the US and 519,000 deaths. But again, estimates are that could be about a quarter of those who have had the infection. Next slide. All right, so just a quick overview. Just the central and peripheral. So your nervous system is broken up into two parts: your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. And the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system are the cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and nerves that generally just get you to be able to move your muscles and to coordinate. One thing that we have found is that corona is neurotoxic and does now cross into both brain matter, spinal cord tissue, and into peripheral nervous systems. So if I could get the next slide. All right, so one of the reasons why we think that COVID is having such a number of effects on people's neurologic functioning is that it's been found across the blood-brain barrier. And really what the blood-brain barrier is it's a barrier of tissues, it's a barrier of cells that really protect viruses and toxic materials from getting into the brain. So several viruses that we know that cross the blood-brain barrier are HIV, syphilis, West Nile virus, the Lyme's disease. And this raises some concern that COVID could potentially have longer term impacts, because once it's in the central nervous system, it could lay dormant and come back and be a problem at some other later time. Now that's preliminary. There's not preliminary data, there's not solid data on that, but it's just something that raises concern, just given other types of viruses that have crossed the blood-brain barrier. Next slide, please. So COVID has been found to result in a number of different, and these are not exclusive, but a number of different central nervous system and peripheral nervous system problems. So this ranges from disorientation to delirium, where somebody may not know where they are, what time it is, headaches, encephalopathy, which is basically confusion, or to encephalitis, which is swelling of the brain matter, overactive immune responses that then do damage to the brain, anoxic brain injury secondary to not enough oxygen getting into the system, and then seizures, strokes, and then up to death. With the peripheral nervous system, we're seeing that people have a loss of taste, and then with also a loss of smell, which is anosmia. So it's impacting the cranial nerve, and that's that's innervating into the brain and actually resulting in swelling in the olfactory bulb. And as those symptoms remit, recent evidence of MRIs show that swelling does go down. So that's not an indication of permanent damage. Another issue on the peripheral nervous system is an autoimmune disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome, where the immune system attacks the peripheral nervous system. So that's another issue that's being seen. All right, next slide, please. All right, so unfortunately, we're relatively new. It seems like we've been in this COVID pandemic forever, but unfortunately, we do not have really good epidemiological data on the prevalence of those who have temporary to long-term neurologic symptoms. We're going to need longitudinal studies, and I'll talk about one that the NIH has just funded to really figure out more about this disease and the course of it over time. But certainly in people who have been hospitalized, so more severe cases, we've seen a lot of people with altered mental status. So in one sample, 53%, 24 had significant fatigue, headaches, 20% suffered strokes, and we're seeing strokes in younger populations. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So some other the studies have shown that we're seeing encephalopathy, or basically your central nervous system isn't working well, and there's confusion with delusions and psychosis. So people are seeing things, hearing things. I just saw a patient the other day that had that sequelae. And then inflammation of the of the central nervous system. So swelling of the spinal cord, or swelling of the brain tissue. And then we're seeing ischemic strokes and then also embolic strokes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, next slide, please. So early on, Mao out of China found that 36% of hospitalized patients exhibited mild to moderate neurologic symptoms. And of those with severe symptoms, 45% exhibited severe neurologic symptoms. So that's a fairly high percentage given those people who have been hospitalized for COVID. And neurologic symptoms, this is considered a respiratory virus, but we have seen neurologic symptoms in those without major respiratory symptoms. And then also what we're seeing is that people are not recovering as quickly as we had hoped, or not having full recoveries. So a recent study just came out with 33% of the discharge sample, people who had stabilized, came out with what we call 33% had dysexecutive symptoms. So problem solving, problems, decision making, attention, those sorts of things, and just poorly organized in their lives, so needed assistance. Anosmia, I mentioned earlier, was found to correlate with some changes in your brain. Your olfactory bulb swells, and then over time it starts to shrink, which is good. We don't want that persistent swelling. And we found some odd findings as well with people with really low oxygen saturation levels, sometimes in the 70th percentile, when really at 85%, we're really looking to see whether that person is going to remain conscious. And it's not quite clear what's going on with respect to that. But this is a really novel virus and affecting a lot of different organ systems. We could go on to the next slide. So a lot of attention has been paid to the fact that people with certain pre-existing conditions are at greater risk for more severe courses or more complicated courses of COVID. Interestingly, this is an area of interest of mine, is those with psychiatric diagnosis within the past year had a 1.6 times increase of developing COVID. That may be tied to socioeconomic status, but I think it was just an interesting study. And certainly rates of acute, which is within the first month to 3 months, to post-traumatic stress disorder, which is following that, to anxiety, to depression, are quite high in those who have had COVID, especially those with severe courses that have been intubated, have been in the ICUs. And then we are, again, I mentioned before, seeing people that are presenting with psychosis, actual hallucinations, delusions. And my experience so far is that the majority of that has resolved over time. Not necessarily all the neurologic symptoms, but the psychosis. We also know that if you have a neurologic injury and you have another neurologic insult, the chances are that you're going to have a multiplicative effect rather than an additive effect. And we are seeing that with people who have pre-existing brain injury or acquired brain injury, such as stroke. But certainly more research is going to be needed in that area. All right, if we could go to the next slide. So there's 3 major factors that seem to be the major culprits for causing neurologic dysfunction. One is encephalitis, which is swelling of the brain, and then the other one is encephalopathy, which is just disruption of brain functioning. And if you'll see the MRI slides, the white areas, except for slide D, those areas shouldn't be there. So that's an area of abnormal brain tissue where there's lesions on the brain. Viral encephalitis can cause just a whole variety of different problems, from headache to vomiting to consciousness disorders. And encephalitis has been found to be both the direct and secondary result of COVID-19. And the secondary effect is related to the immune response. If you could go to the next slide for me. So this is a novel virus. None of us have had exposure to it. That's one of the reasons why it's so contagious, why it's spreading so quickly. And what we're seeing is, and this is not atypical to other viruses or other diseases, is that we can oftentimes get an immune over response. So what that often can result in is what we call a cytokine storm or cascade, where there's a release of chemicals that will result in further damage to brain material. So symptoms of this can, again, range the gamut of all the neurologic symptoms that I've mentioned. All right, if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so, and then the other one is acute cerebral vascular disease. A lot of this is both what we call ischemic strokes and hemorrhagic strokes. So ischemic stroke is when you have a block in your brain, and a hemorrhagic stroke is when you have a bleed in your brain. And one of the issues that we're seeing that seem to be generating a lot of these strokes are what we call hypercoagulability. And we're seeing this in younger samples. So I've seen this in a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, and a 50-year-old where they've had heart problems, heart swelling. The heart wasn't really pumping the blood well enough. The blood started to clot and then throw off clots into the brain and start to cause strokes. So that's another area as well that we're really worried about. Also, we are seeing that that we're seeing some demyelination conditions, such as both due to immune response into the toxic encephalopathy. So if we go on to the next page. So another area that we're seeing is what we think is chronic anoxia, which is a lack of oxygen to the brain. And we're particularly concerned about this in people who are on respirators for long periods of time with lower oxygen levels in their bloodstream. And what this ends up doing is it ends up causing brain damage, and it can cause diffuse brain injury. If you see the scans down below, I'm not sure how clear the colors go through, but if you look at the amyloid scans, they're quite different from the negative scans below in the fact that there's a lot of problems a lot of issues that are going on within the brain at that moment. We can do the next slide. So clearly a lot of research is going to be needed to research COVID more and the neurologic effects of COVID. The NIH recently released the I think it's $1.15 billion in funding for post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 infection, or PASC. And really what the purpose of that is to get a sense of what does the spectrum of recovery look like in the population? How many people continue to have problems? What is the underlying biological cause of those problems? And what makes some people vulnerable and some people not? And then does COVID trigger changes in the body that can increase the risk of other conditions such as heart problems or chronic issues with the brain? So with that, I'd just like to thank the Brain Injury Alliance of America, the Brain Injury Association of America, and the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators for hosting this, and Dr. Masel for chairing this panel. So I'll kick it to the next person.
Thank you so very much. That was really very good. I learned quite a bit. Next up is Jennifer Braun. Jennifer will talk about how COVID-19 has impacted the state's ability to provide services, necessitating accommodations, as well as the impact on individuals with brain injury receiving brain injury services. Jennifer, it's your ball.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Braun, and I am the Brain Injury Manager for the Bureau of Special Healthcare Needs within the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. I oversee all of the brain injury program components within the Department of Health and Senior Services, including the Adult Brain Injury Program, the Brain Injury Waiver, the Traumatic Brain Injury State Partnership Implementation Grant, the Missouri Brain Injury Advisory Council, the Brain Injury Fund, and the Traumatic Brain Injury State Registry. I also sit on the National Board of Directors as the Treasurer and the Chair of the Public Policy Committee. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how COVID-19 has affected the state of Missouri's abilities to provide services, necessitating accommodations, as well as the impact on individuals with brain injury receiving brain injury related services. I will first discuss the two programs that I oversee, the Brain Injury Waiver and the Adult Brain Injury Program. The Missouri Brain Injury Waiver provides service coordination and home and community-based services to Missouri Medicaid recipients ages 21 to 65 who are living with a traumatic brain injury. Individuals must require medical care equivalent to the level of care received in a nursing home to qualify for brain injury waiver services. The Adult Brain Injury Program started in 1985 and assists Missouri residents ages 21 to 65 who are living with a traumatic brain injury. Through service coordination, the program links individuals to resources to enable each person to obtain goals of independent living, community participation, and employment. Individuals who meet financial eligibility requirements may also receive community-based rehabilitation services to help achieve identified goals. Rehabilitation services include counseling, vocational training, employment supports, and home and community-based support training. COVID-19 has forced us to really think of ways that we can modify the way that we authorize services and deliver those services. COVID-19 has impacted participants in a number of ways. The impacts that we have seen the most are increased anxiety and self-isolation for brain injury participants. Many participants have canceled services due to the fear and anxiety that COVID-19 has caused them. Participants have remained hesitant to begin or continue services due to the fear of exposure to others. The anxiety has kept participants from not only participating in services, but also just leaving their own homes. Thus, this has resulted in participants' decline of mental health. Some have had difficulties getting groceries, medications, etc. When COVID-19 first arrived in Missouri, participants and providers alike were nervous of how to continue moving forward in a world where we had to social distance and isolate. Missouri submitted an Appendix K to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, modifying the brain injury waiver to be able to deliver services through telehealth. In addition, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services are approved for personal care services to be provided by family members hired by provider agencies. Through other state waiver programs, such as the Developmental Disabilities Waiver, expansion of home delivered meals and other services were added as part of the Appendix K. After having multiple conversations with providers, service coordinators, and management staff, it was decided that telehealth services were to be offered to all brain injury participants for the brain injury waiver and the adult brain injury program. It was determined that telehealth offered a way to keep individuals connected. In addition, it ensured that participants continued to have access to their direct care staff. With a creative approach, many participants were able to continue working on their goals. By way of video messenger or phone conversations, a sense of comfort and reassurance to program participants that showed them everything should be okay. Telehealth communications ensured that participants would not lose hope and taught them that we all could learn to work around any barriers. Telehealth offered the possibility of participants having more available time options for their sessions. For example, if a participant did not have a scheduled session with their direct care staff on a particular day, but would like immediate assistance with going over emails, paperwork, or making conference-style phone calls, the participant could reach out to their direct care staff and ask if they were available to provide assistance at that time. Prior to COVID-19, if the direct care staff were not in the position to drive to a participant's home due to a tight schedule, the answer may have been no, because that hour or so that would have been taken up with drive time, thus cutting into the time that was spent with the participant. Having telehealth services available eliminated that barrier. With the participant via video messenger or phone call, we were able to jump in immediately and work with that participant. In addition, if a participant was working on obtaining independent housing, staff could assist them via telehealth to make calls to landlords, to set up appointments for them, to take tours of apartment locations, etc. Even though Missouri has had positive feedback by authorizing and delivering telehealth services, telehealth is not for everyone. While most participants can benefit from the interventions provided via telehealth, some require an in-person approach. Some individuals may require hand-over-hand assistance, visual cues, and redirection. Sometimes their direct care staff will need to be present in the same environment as the participant in order to gauge the levels of distraction or overstimulation. COVID-19 has caused participants to have increased anxiety, and some are afraid to leave their homes. It is difficult for both participants and the service coordinator to do everything needed virtually at all times. The Adult Brain Injury Program strives to allow participants to become more independent and integrate them back into the community. One objective of the program is to work with program participants on obtaining employment, and while we continue to assist with employment opportunities, there have been many adult brain injury program participants that have lost their jobs due to COVID-19, especially those that are working in cafes or restaurants. Another topic I would like to discuss would be the funding concern. Missouri brain injury programs receive funding from the state's general revenue, the state's brain injury fund, as well as Medicaid dollars. The brain injury fund is in Missouri state statute, and in all criminal cases, including violations of any county ordinance or any violation of criminal or traffic laws of the state, including an infraction, there is a surcharge of $2 assessed to the brain injury fund. States like Missouri that depend on revenue from traffic violations for their trust fund programs have found that due to reduced traffic because of stay-at-home orders, there have been less fines and ultimately less revenue. And while budgets are being heavily scrutinized and reviewed, this has caused great concern for our state. In addition to funding being a constant struggle, staff working time has been confusing and difficult. I know for myself, I have 13 service coordinators and 3 programmatic staff working on brain injury activities every day. When COVID-19 hit, and because we all work within the Department of Health or within a local public health department, we were being pulled in a million different directions, from trying to authorize services in a new format to providing assistance with COVID-19 activities. Some of those activities included data entry, contact tracing, case investigation, answering hotline calls, etc. Quite a few of our day-to-day activities, as well as our outreach and educational pieces, were put on hold. This meant that we were not able to provide education and resources to individuals as soon as what we would have liked to, and we had to find new ways to adapt and learn how to do each other's job so that participants were able to continue to receive those services. Service coordinators have been pulled even more than usual to having to learn about a new disease and educate the public about it was very difficult. However, vaccinations are being distributed as quickly as possible within our state by way of a 3-tier system and through the assistance of all of the local public health departments, as well as the Missouri National Guard. One item that we have recognized that we continue to get requests for is the need of electronic devices, such as cell phones, computers, internet connections, etc., to all program participants. Missouri has strengthened its partnerships with the Assistive Technology of Missouri to create and distribute toolkits to those in need. We also have great consultants and partners that continue to provide assistance and ideas of ways to enhance services in our state. Without those partners, we would not be the state that we are today, and we would not have been able to deliver services through one of the most difficult times I have ever experienced. So, with all of that being said, it is my honor to introduce to you our next presenter, my friend and colleague, Eric Washington. Many of you know Eric through all of his advocacy efforts that he does across the entire nation. I will let him introduce himself, but I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I want to thank Jennifer for introducing me. I also want to say I really wish I could write papers like Jennifer. So one day she'll show me. But I played football. I had, a couple of concussions in college, which led to my TBI. And I would never blame, someone else, but I feel like if you know better, you'll do better. So I feel like we can all still play sports. We can all still have fun, but we have to be safer. We have to really protect ourselves. Pretty much during the pandemic, before the pandemic, I was diagnosed with stage 3 multiple myeloma, which is pretty much, depending on what you know about it, some people think it's a death sentence. Some people think it's, you can fight it, but it's still kind of new as COVID. We're learning different things every single day. And while the pandemic was going on, when it first started, my doctor said, hey, you have 6 months to live, and, it's not going in the right direction. And just like Jennifer said, anyone that knows who I am, I'm a pretty stubborn person. So the doctor said, you have 6 months to live. And I said, well, you just hold that thought. I'll probably be around for I'll stay around for 6 months and a day. So I'm so stubborn, I'm going to stay around for another day. And I've been here for almost a year. The pandemic started, and I was afraid because having pre-existing injury, injuries, you have illness, you don't really understand what we're dealing with. What happened was my doctor said, and I appreciate his honesty. He said, honestly, Eric, you don't have to worry about what's outside in COVID. You have to worry about what's killing you inside. So at that point, I just decided to follow the CDC rules and guidelines and stay as safe as I possibly can and do the things that I can do so I can be around a little bit more to try to advocate for people that, don't really have a voice. So pandemic started. I had a bone marrow transplant August 24th, which is the day my father was born. Then my mother came down October 1st to be with me after the transplant. My mother passed away from COVID. Me and my mother contracted COVID October 8th together. I must have picked it up from the hospital because I was transported from hospital to home. I didn't, see anyone or wasn't visiting one. She came down, she caught COVID. She passed away October 13th. 10 days later, I found out my transplant was unsuccessful. So that was all in a month span. So not only did I go through a process where I didn't have a support system really, because people that were around me that cared about me, they really couldn't be around me because I had no immune system. So I had to sit around by myself and wonder what was going on. It's like Dr. Hall said, you know, the confusion, chemo brain. I don't know what people know about that, but when you take high doses of chemo, it affects your brain on top of having a brain injury, on top of having COVID. So I was alone, I was confused, I didn't have any help, there was no support system, and everyone wanted to help, but they just couldn't. And now we get to a point where your mental health is being affected because you're wondering why me, why not? But the entire world went through the same thing together. So we all struggled from the same identical things. And the only thing I could do for a second was I kind of laughed and I said, well, this is like an experiment for, you know, now everyone knows how it feels to have a brain injury. Everyone now knows what it's like to be isolated. We all know what it's like to have a change in lifestyle. We all know what it's like to be able to do something and then one day it's taken away. That's how we live as brain injury survivors every single day. And the research can't show that. But now everyone on this call, everyone that's here, the 626 people, all have had life-altering experiences where you can't do the things that you used to do, no matter what you say. And that's what we live with every single day. And it's difficult to try to put the pieces together by yourself. But now, since we all been through it, we can actually help each other get past it. So there was a big impact on health, which was physical and mental. A lot of people with brain injuries, I relied on going outside and going to the gym to be able to stay focused. And that's what I did. Now I can't go to the gym anymore. So, and the people at Peloton said they weren't going to give me a free bike. So I didn't get a Peloton for free this year. So maybe next year. Then you have support systems. In the urban community in Kansas City, it looks different than it does maybe in a rural area. So now the buses shut down earlier. No one's allowing anyone in the building, so we can't have a support group. And as you guys all know, humans crave interaction. We love to touch people and high five and go to the game. But now when you can't hang out and speak together in a support group setting, now all the progress that we made throughout the year, they backtrack because now people are by themselves. The drinking rates going up, you know, just bad decisions, suicide, all those things are going up because people are now isolating themselves. In the urban community here, we try to get internet, but what happened was we weren't prepared for this type of internet. So what happened was people didn't have the capacity or the bandwidth to be able to do telehealth. So now we can't even meet with the doctor. I in my personal opinion, at the top, I feel like maybe we can leverage that with a T-Mobile or a database and say, hey, let's get these people internet between these hours a day so they can meet with a doctor or meet with their support group so that they can stay together until we can get back around each other. I think that's something that's fairly simple. We shut it off after, you know, so they don't abuse it, but we allow them to use it so they can stay mentally sane. Get the phone lines open so everyone can really have conversations if they want to commit suicide, if they just want to talk to a person, just to know that it's just to hear it's going to be okay. And then lastly, I just want, you know, I want people to understand that, you know, it's going to be okay. It's going to take time. I mean, things already look better than it did before, but we all have to stick together. And I think these meetings are important. These panels are important. And it's just, we have to continue to have the dialogue because where I'm from, in the inner city, it looks totally different than it does in the suburban America. And we have to have everyone at the table so we can have those conversations so everyone can be supported and not just one demographic over another. So that's all I have to say, and I want to thank you guys.
Well, thank you so very much, Eric. I appreciate your thoughts. And our final presenter is Matt Breiding. Dr. Matt Breiding will talk about the need for data, very, very important with regard to COVID-19 and vaccines. Matt, it's up to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Breiding. I'm the team lead for the traumatic brain injury team at CDC. I want to start by thanking the Congressional Brain Injury Task Force, BIAA, and NASHIA for sponsoring this virtual event. It's really an honor for me to speak with you all today. The enduring leadership of Congressman Pascrell and Bacon and the rest of the task force is essential to preventing TBI and making a difference in the lives of Americans with brain injury. Brain Injury Awareness Day gives us a chance to reflect each year about the progress we've made, refine our efforts to prevent brain injury, and to be responsive to those living with the consequences of a TBI. The topic of today's briefing is the intersection between COVID and TBI, and over the past year, many of us at CDC have been called to do work to address the COVID pandemic, as have many of you who serve TBI survivors. So I also want to start today by thanking each of you for the ways in which you've helped those with TBI in navigating this very difficult time. So the subject I'd like to talk about today is TBI data and surveillance. Surveillance and data collection is the cornerstone of prevention, because if we don't know the scope of a problem, then we can't adequately implement solutions. Each of us has really seen public health surveillance in action this year, perhaps much more closely than we would like, as we saw the number of COVID cases rise and fall throughout the year at the national level and in our own communities. Our current TBI surveillance activities use medical or administrative claims databases to capture concussions that are seen in emergency departments or more advanced care settings. However, we know that they miss patients who present to primary care or urgent care. They miss those that are evaluated on the sideline of a playing field, or those who don't seek treatment at all. So we really aren't getting the complete picture. Comprehensive estimates of TBI in the United States and the circumstances in which they occur are needed to answer questions like how many TBIs occur in the United States each year? What are the most common circumstances in which TBIs occur across the board? What services do people with TBIs receive, both initially and in rehabilitation, long-term services? What are the short and long-term health outcomes of having a TBI? We need to know more about that. And then how are different subpopulations impacted? This final question is particularly important because we've seen during the past year that TBI, like COVID, impacts certain groups more than others. For example, American Indian and Alaska Native people have higher rates of TBI-related hospitalizations and deaths. Non-Hispanic, Black, and Hispanic patients are less likely to receive follow-up care and rehabilitation following a TBI. Military service members, veterans, people who are in correctional or detention facilities, and those who experience homelessness are more likely to have a history of TBI. So in order to reduce the negative impact of TBI, we really need to understand how to target prevention efforts to those that are impacted the most. And TBI surveillance and improving TBI surveillance can help us to do that. In December of 2018, the Traumatic Brain Injury Program Reauthorization Act of 2018 was signed into law, and this bill authorized CDC to collect and analyze data on the national prevalence and incidence of concussion. So in order to address this request, CDC piloted a household survey to establish how to best establish a national concussion surveillance system, one that would reliably identify head injuries that are experienced by both children and adults, and also obtains information related to the severity, signs and symptoms experienced, the mechanism of injury, including whether it was sports related or not, any medical care received, and then some information on post-injury functioning. So from September of 2018 to September of 2019, we completed 6 data collection cycles and spoke to over 10,000 people. And the findings from this pilot, we hope, will help us to design an ongoing national concussion surveillance system that will be able to accurately determine how many Americans sustain a concussion each year, and to help us determine the cause of all of those concussions. In addition, a national concussion surveillance system would inform leaders within communities and states by providing national estimates of sports-related concussion among youth that occur both in and outside of organized sports. It could tell us information about the most common causes of injury from concussion, This could include motor vehicle crashes, falls, and self-harm, which we know are some of the leading causes of traumatic brain injury. It could tell us trend information over time to tell us whether the number of concussions is increasing or decreasing, and telling us whether our prevention efforts are working. It could tell us, it could tell healthcare providers and hospitals about where patients seek care for concussion, and then how that's changing over time. And then potentially it can tell us national estimates of the number of people who have ever had a traumatic brain injury and how many people are still living with the effects of a TBI. So regarding COVID and TBI, having an ongoing surveillance system might have allowed us to examine some of the questions that CDC has been getting about how the COVID pandemic has impacted TBI. We've been getting questions like, were there fewer TBIs during the time of the pandemic, potentially due to fewer kids playing sports, resulting in fewer sports concussions, or because people were driving less, were there fewer motor vehicle crashes resulting in TBIs from that? We were asked, were there more TBIs due to intimate partner violence, with so many people constrained to spending more time at home? And then another key question was, were people who actually had a TBI, most likely a mild TBI, were they less likely to seek care than perhaps they would have been before the COVID pandemic? And these are all questions that an ongoing surveillance system could have potentially answered, because they can allow us to compare the numbers in the year prior to an event, what's going on during an event, and then what it looks like afterwards. Similar questions were asked about the impact of return to play laws, which were put in place in all 50 states and addressed concussion management in youth athletics. Having an ongoing surveillance system in place could have helped us to answer questions about the impact of these policies at the national level. So in summary, public health surveillance can help us answer questions about how unexpected events like COVID, like the passage of return to play laws that can really affect various public health problems, how they impacted the overall numbers and how people acted in response. So I'm optimistic that this pilot is the first step in obtaining better national estimates that will really help us inform prevention and response activities across the country. So in closing, I want to thank you for the important role each of you play in ensuring those who have experienced a brain injury have the knowledge, resources, care, and support they need to truly live well. Your support of CDC is greatly appreciated, and CDC is really proud to be part of the community and the role we serve. So I look forward to updating you again next year on the progress we're making, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was great. Panelists have certainly raised awareness of how the pandemic is impacting individuals with brain injuries and their families as well, and how the pandemic may result in neurological conditions. So how can we better inform the public and individuals impacted by brain injury about these issues? This is the challenge for the Brain Injury Association and NASH and all the wonderful organizations that we get to work with. I'm going to, first of all, I just want to point out, Eric mentioned that there's increased incidence of suicidal ideation. And someone asked that we highlight this National Suicide Hotline, and that number is 800-273-8255, 800-273-8255. So we're going to start with some questions. The NIH has announced a new database and will collect from clinicians information, excuse me, about COVID-related neurologic symptoms, complications, and outcomes, as well as COVID-19 effects on pre-existing neurological conditions. Dr. Hall, have you been notified, and are you providing information, and what do you think about that?
That information is coming in quickly at this point. So within research journals, so we're gaining more and more information as basically per week, and I expect our knowledge of COVID and the effects of brain injury just to increase exponentially over time.
Do you, just curious, do you think that we will have enough information that we can do something with, and I speak as a practicing neurologist, that we can do something with that information with this pandemic, and knock on wood, there won't be another, but you think we'll have something?
Well, the therapeutics are I think more along your lines. So what I think that we're going to have to do is just do what we normally do with acquired or traumatic brain injury, provide wraparound services. You know, I really appreciate Eric talking about some of the isolation issues. I'm hearing a lot about that, and you know, it was. I had chills when he said that, you know, now you know what it's like to have a brain injury, because I've had 3 people tell me that, you know, it's caused all of us to be isolated in a way that, you know, I think maybe gives us insight into those that are really struggling with long-term health issues. Now, one other thing I did want to touch on is the mental health component, and people not being ashamed of it. And please, if you need help, reach out. Even if it's to the Brain Injury Association, Brain Injury Alliance, they can get you connected up. Now, as far as long-term treatments, I think we need to figure out really a lot more of the underlying biological mechanisms that are going on with COVID, particularly those that are having brain fog, this sort of nebulous term that's typically associated with memory problems, slowed thinking, and attention. It's unclear what's causing that, and my guess is that it's probably multifactorial, or there's multiple things that are causing that. So I think when we start to look at therapeutics, they're getting better for treating acute COVID. Hopefully we'll be getting better information on maybe long-term treatments. But at this point, I'm not aware of any kind of medications. Rather, what we're really focused on is good rehabilitation. So speech pathology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, rehabilitation psychology for those that need it, physiatry. So kind of what we have known within the brain injury community, applying that here, even though this is a respiratory virus. So I think that, you know, our experience is going to serve us well in this area, or has so far. But you know, we're still on this learning curve, and you know, when that learning curve is going to start to, you know, tip down, I'm not sure.
Great, thank you. Okay, Matt, is data being gathered regarding individuals with disabilities, including people with TBIs that have COVID? Are we connecting those dots?
So I'm not aware of anything at the moment that's, you know, I think trying to collect the long-term effects of COVID. I'm certain that will be done. I think probably, you know, at least at CDC, we're in, you know, we're trying to get through the sort of acute phase of the pandemic, and then I'm certain we and other groups will be tracking the long-term effects of COVID and how long those last, and you know, the full range. But I'm not aware of anything currently that's collecting that information.
Okay, thank you. Because you know, we think that's important.
Yeah, very much so.
Yes, sir. All right, Jennifer, has the pandemic provided us with anything that we can take home in the future? What lessons have we learned for improving service delivery? You mentioned telehealth and technology. How are we going to be able to use what we have learned going forward?
Yeah, I think here in Missouri, we changed a lot of our policies and practices that really weren't considered in the past. And we really had to think outside of the box on how to deliver those services, because people were afraid to go outside of their home or have someone come inside of their home, regardless if it's personal care services or private duty nursing. And so we really had to revamp the way that we thought about service delivery, and telehealth was a big move. And I know other states have already implemented it. You know, Arkansas is doing great things with telehealth, but it was brand new for Missouri to be able to have that option. And we're going to continue to do so moving forward. It has been a very positive outcome for our state and in regards to the delivery of services. And, you know, you'll still have providers and participants that really still want and need that face-to-face interaction. Perfectly understandable. But, you know, if we can do telehealth services for adjustment counseling, and so you can have more interactions with individuals instead of having to cancel and reschedule appointments and so on. So, yeah, I would say telehealth was the biggest adjustment. And Eric and I have been collaborating with our local university and our Brain Injury Association of Missouri here to try to figure out ways that we can enhance communication within our state by the way of the cell phone devices or internet, or like what Eric was talking about, you know, contacting T-Mobile and having internet available to individuals that don't have it, you know, in very rural areas of the state. So, you know, we want to go big in our state, and it's just trying to figure out how to make that happen. So, and I think COVID has pushed us to that point.
If I could just add a little, with respect to televideo, it's really been a game changer, and something that I think will continue to over time. One of the things in Iowa that we deal with is some issues with broadband speed. So this has larger implications into infrastructure. So you know, the telehealth has been great, but there are certain downsides to it, and certainly within certain parts of the area, certain parts of the country, and underrepresented areas. So hopefully we can, you know, this will be a spur to have more access to telehealth, because I think we've opened a window here where we have services for some that, you know, will make it easier for them to receive services, particularly those with brain injuries who can't drive, who live far away. Hopefully, you know, this will be a good side to COVID, that, you know, we'll be able to make it easier to connect to those people that we're working with.
I have a question, it's in essence a real-time issue. As many of you know, in Texas, the governor said we're going to open up things 100% next week, which had everybody scratching their heads. I got an email from my cousin in Colorado, a physician, chastising me. I said, hey, you know, it wasn't my fault. I didn't make that decision. But everybody said, and I've been vaccinated twice, and you know, my whole family has. So what are we going to tell the folks with the brain injuries relative to this? Because it's still very nebulous, and it's everybody's, you know, talking to each other. Well, are you going to wear a mask? Are you going to wear a mask? You know, how are you going to do it? Mike and Jennifer, what are we going to tell the folks with brain injuries? How do we advise them? Because it's not somebody's just turning the light on and off. It's a transition.
Well, one of the things that I've been pushing is certainly wearing a mask, social distancing, and getting a vaccine as soon as possible. And it would be nice if people with traumatic brain injuries, if disabilities related to that, were on a, you know, I'm not quite sure where they are on the priority list, but certainly to be a higher priority, because, you know, just the increased risk for that. But yeah, I mean, the social isolation component that Eric talked about is just, you know, that's a huge part. So by protecting yourself, by, you know, wearing a mask, by staying 6 feet away from each other, we know that will generally protect most people. So definitely putting that education in. Now, sometimes with those with moderate to severe traumatic brain injuries are not comprehending why they need to wear a mask. So then, you know, what we need to do is as healthcare providers is we wear more protected PPE to protect them, because just confusion or not understanding can create some issues.
Absolutely. Eric, you had something to say?
I wanted to jump in and speak to it from a brain injury survivor standpoint. I feel like a lot of times, and this is speaking for the brain injury community, we're asking the question sometimes to the professionals. I can help with the survivor thought process. I had the vaccine. I also wear masks, but I can speak to, you know, my community as a community leader and say, these are some things I think we should do to help out. Now, if a professional says it, I can say, hey, you just read that in a book. I can say, I go through the same thing you guys go through. I walk the same nightmares that you live. So I'm telling you that I tried it. Walk with me. Try it with me. You know, let's do this together. Let's help the professional instead of vice versa. So I think that if you can have allies on our side, then if we work together, where me and Dr. Hall sit down at the table, when we both stand side by side, they know that Dr. Hall is coming from a good place because he has someone that walks the same shoes as the other people. But when he's by himself, it's like he's talking at us. So I think that we need to do a better job of helping each other and all sitting down, having different people from different demographics or, you know, help each other. I think that would help.
Yeah, I see a lot of people with dementia in my clinic, and it's been awful. This year has been awful for them. You know, you start them on a medication and you see them in 3 months, whatever, and you say, are things better? And the answer is, well, how can I know? They can't go anywhere. They can't do anything. And it's just like brain injury, traumatic brain injury. They're socially isolated. And I think a lot of people have just gone downhill because of that, because they don't have the connection that you talked about.
Mhm.
Okay. Matt, are materials available that are geared to individuals with brain injury with regarding the symptoms and providers and vaccines? And has CDC prepared materials, information to assist individuals with brain injury to obtain the vaccine and for providers to assist them with this difficult endeavor sometimes?
So we have not developed materials for brain injury survivors and COVID. I think I would probably refer folks to the general CDC materials, and a lot of those are geared towards those that sort of vulnerable populations and how they should act to protect themselves. It's always been, I think, a central focus of CDC is are those who are more vulnerable, and how what extra precautions they should take. I believe it was BIAA that came out with a statement regarding vaccinations not too long ago, and so I would certainly refer folks to that statement. And I do know that CDC is working on some guidance for people to, as they're vaccinated, what are the things that are safer for them to do, and so that should hopefully be coming out sometime soon and provide a little bit more guidance. And I expect that there will be something in there about people who are more vulnerable, such as those who have experienced TBI, and any extra precautions they should take as we start to open things up.
Great, thank you. Yeah, those of us who treat folks with TBI clearly know that they are vulnerable, that they are, this is a disease process and chronic neuroinflammation. So that would be great. And Susan asked me to mention that BIAA has a dedicated COVID section. And there was a question for Eric. All right, Eric, did you find a disparity? It's a great question. Did you find a disparity between the availability of rehabilitative type therapies and mental health therapies?
Well, I can tell you, whoever asked that question, they don't really want me to open Pandora's box, so I'll keep it very simple. Especially in the urban community, when you have the label Medicaid, then you're in a situation where you don't have, so you're limited in where you can go. And just like one of my really good friends out of Pueblo, Colorado, you can be five miles from great, rehabilitative services, and then you come back across the border and you can't find anyone. I was in a hospital where when they found out my cancer they sent me to the great doctor, and he was in the same building, the same hospital I was in. I was like, oh, he's the man. And they said, oh, your insurance doesn't cover him, so you have to go to the other guy. That was very discouraging, and they were in the same building. So I didn't understand it. So those are some situations you deal with where there's answers. You have Dr. Hall and Dr. Brent, I don't say your name wrong, but if you guys are the best of the best, and I know you guys can actually help me, but my insurance won't get me in the door, I'm sitting there looking through a glass window saying, that's the answer I needed, I wanted, but I can't have it. And that's the part where the disparity comes from. And that's where the gaps are. Everyone deserves better. Everyone deserves help. So if the answer's there, why can't everyone have access to it? So that's a whole nother topic for another day. I don't want to bore you guys with that, but that's more so what happened. I had access, I could see it, but I couldn't obtain it because I'm on disability. So I was not able to obtain the resources that I need to stay mentally sane or to get the telehealth that I needed. They called me, they pretty much called me from a payphone. Hey, go to that payphone at 5 o'clock and stand there and we'll call. That was the situation I was in. So yeah, it's difficult.
I understand. What kind of assistance helped you the most throughout the pandemic, and I guess relative to your brain injuries too?
I think the support groups, the fact that we kept pushing support groups in Missouri, We had something called freeconferencecall.com. Obviously, you know, it wasn't a service that was attached to, you know, you have to pay for it. It's more donation based, like Wikipedia or something like that, where you can get on there and we can actually have support. So we had actually ramped up the support group. So instead of having them one time, it actually gave people the ability to go to different support groups in different areas. You know, I went to a support group in California, Colorado, Western Missouri. You know, you can go anywhere and you just meet people and even get on the phone. So I think the support group push really helped people with brain injuries stay mentally afloat. And then eventually you start to meet people across the way that you would have never met if we would have been able to be so isolated.
Yeah, as you're talking, I was wondering maybe that we should have that for the dementia patients.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. A question for Dr. Hall. How can one, question just disappeared. How can, I think it said, how can somebody sign up for an NIH study? Dr. Hall, how can one sign up for an NIH research study?
Yeah, so with respect to the $1.2 billion study I mentioned, I don't think they're in recruitment phase right now. I think that they just released the funding proposal. So I would keep your eyes open, you know, with the Brain Injury Alliance, with the Brain Injury Association, with other organizations, and you know, I encourage those people, you know, people to join those studies because we need the information.
Yeah, it just came out. I mean, it just,
yes, it just came out. I think it was. I think the release was February 23rd. So it's really in the early stages.
Yeah, and it's going to take a while for people to organize because they want multi-center collaboration.
Yeah, and there will be other studies at other institutes as well. This virus is going to be looked at probably more than any virus we've had so far. Potentially, I'm not sure.
Oh, I agree with you. Okay, another question. How are we advocating change with adding more healthcare options and or services to rural areas? How are we advocating change with adding more healthcare options and or services to rural areas?
So I can take a shot at that. So I work in a rural area. We have used telehealth. I'm a neuropsychologist. I do cognitive assessments. If you told me last year that I would be testing people over the internet, I would have laughed at you and said that's not possible or not scientifically valid. But you know, circumstances changed, and I think we're doing a good job of transitioning as much as we can. We can't measure everything we want to measure, but certainly within my field, we've moved to telehealth, and it's always been in person. And that's also included doing inpatient evaluations who've had COVID to see whether or not they had decisional capacity, testing on an iPad that a nurse would roll into somebody's room. So it really has forced us in a good way, I think, well, in a good and bad way, to use technology. Some people like technology, some people don't. So it's been a little more challenging with those with significant cognitive problems, or maybe people who have dementia, as you mentioned. But it certainly has changed the way in which we practice both psychology and neuropsychology. I can tell you that. And I would expect that some of those changes will remain permanent because we've set a model that this can be done. And if we can get to people easier, that's better.
Yeah. You know, we forget about the role of the state brain injury associations, but this is where you talk to your state legislators and get those kinds of things changed.
Yeah, one of the things that the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa did, which I thought was just an excellent idea, was they contacted all of their prior clients and did a needs assessment. So here are people that are at risk, that are vulnerable, and I think just reaching out to them, and I think they've done it twice now. I think is a wonderful practice, and hope that other states would pick that up as well, because it's a safety net. People may be out there thinking and wondering, but you know, getting a contact from somebody and, you know, hey, do you need information, or, you know, do you have any concerns, and we'll be able to answer those, I think is phenomenal.
That's wonderful.
And
Yeah.
I'll just add, yeah, from the CDC perspective, we've certainly recognized that the care for brain injury survivors in rural areas, there's, you know, some unique challenges, oftentimes with primary care physicians having to handle complicated cases on their own. Often there's not, the kinds of specialists that, you would typically refer to in those areas. And so one of the things we did in the past year was pilot a teletraining initiative that connected rural healthcare providers to each other to talk through sort of the basics of managing traumatic brain injury and how to handle some of the more complicated issues. And, not only a didactic portion, but, a case discussion as well. And found that to have some very positive results. So we certainly recognize that that's a particular challenge is TBI in the rural setting.
Oh, it's a major issue. Speaking as a physician, I will tell you that the amount of training that the students get in brain injury is pretty much like that. And then they go out into, a lot of them go into rural areas, and we treat our patients in our post-acute programs or in the rehab hospitals and then send them back home out into the boondocks, and they're treated by doctors who have no idea, not absolutely clueless. So it is a big issue, and the more training we can get to them, or any healthcare provider, is absolutely needed. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, here's one. We have several clients that are nervous/uneasy about attending mental health therapy online. Good point. How would you suggest encouraging them to attend even though it is not in person? So they don't feel comfortable doing it online.
So I can tell you what we've done here in Missouri in regards to that. So we provide counseling services through both of our waiver and our program. And what we've done is had the service coordinator encourage that individual or be present during those calls to have that second level of just comfortably have that person there to have that cushion almost, that they have somebody that they know that they can trust to help guide them through that process. And then once they establish that relationship with that therapist, then do one-on-one type therapy sessions until we're able to do face-to-face. But our service coordinators have played a big impact in regards to that and just being able to be there and provide support to our participants.
What do you think the fear is of doing it online?
I think it's the fear for me and for my participants. I think it's the fear of the unknown. You have a new technology that you've never used in the past, and now your face is on camera, and so you're seeing yourself and you're seeing another person, and it's different than talking to your friend on the phone or doing FaceTime. You're actually having a serious conversation about your healthcare and your needs, and do you have internet? Do you not have internet? Are you going to use up all your minutes because you're having this counseling session? So I think there's a lot of details involved, and I think just having that other person there to help provide that support is crucial.
And I think just talking about, just being very open and having that conversation about what's triggering the anxiety and to talk it out so that hopefully you can put that person's, unease to rest.
I think too, a lot of times, I think the next level of wraparound services, we need to have some form of peer-to-peer mentorship to where I actually call a lot of people in Missouri, a lot around the world, and I help them, eliminate some of those fears, have those conversations with them like, hey, tell me what do you think? Because the brain injury community is very close-knit. I can go into a gas station, hear a guy have a brain injury, we just become friends tonight. So I can tell you that a lot of times they would listen to another person with a brain injury, speak to it and say, hey, it's not that bad. They have secure networks, but you have to have a person that's mentored, that's high enough in the, in a situation where they trust that person, to where they would take a chance on it. So we can have the case manager sit there, but if I had a conversation with the guy the night before, he's like, you know what, I'm ready. I think I want to do it now because someone in my community that lives the life that I live, he says it's okay. That's wraparound services at its finest to me.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Rolling down to see if we got anything else. Okay. Well, I think that's pretty good. I think this was, boy, I learned a lot. I really did. So I want to close, and I want to thank NASHA and BIAA and Susan Vaughn and folks at the Brain Injury Association and other stakeholders in supporting a range of issues during the session of Congress, which will hopefully improve service delivery, including advocating for the $5 million to CDC to launch the National Concussion Surveillance System to address incidents. Very, very important. We really need to get that done. We need to increase funding for the Administration for Community Living, which is TBI's state partnership program to assist states with improving access to service and supports, especially during this time of pandemic. We need to build knowledge on the COVID-related brain injuries. We know Congress has appropriated significant funding to the NIH to study the virus. Advocates need to encourage NIH to continue their focused research on COVID-19 to explain the mechanisms of resulting brain injury and resulting cognitive impairments from the virus, and discover how people with existing TBIs, pre-existing TBIs, if you will, and other chronic health conditions will be affected by this virus. And also Medicaid, home and community services, the current COVID relief bill in Congress is working on does include a bump up in the federal match for Medicaid home and community-based services to help states with services and support during this time. Unfortunately, only about a half of the states offer Medicaid home and community-based services for individuals with brain injuries. And finally, I do want to thank our panelists. I appreciate it. You know, this is not easy stuff. You got to put together your talk. You got to put together your slide. And I know it's very time consuming. And also you have to open up your soul. And I really appreciate everything that you all have done. I want to again thank Congressman Pascrell and Congressman Bacon for their work, and thank them in advance for their continued work in this session and the upcoming sessions in Congress. And I hope that you guys are there for a long, long time representing folks with a brain injury. So I want to thank you all for participating. And if there are any questions, you can get them to us. Send them to the Brain Injury Association, and then we'll get back to you. I promise on that. So thank you very much for all your participation, and have a good afternoon.